I was thinking it's almost, because I think from all the talks we've already heard, you can tell, the idea of understanding the ecology is a big part of what people in the industry do, the topic. But I was thinking of it more of how you need to convince those others, so people that come in to help you, the people that fund you, to understand post-planting and particularly the ecological side of it. For those who don't know me, I'm from UNSW in Sydney, Centre of Ecosystem Science, and we're part of, Sean and I Sean got this really cool logo done, this TRE one, so that's my group at the moment, but we paid $200 for that logo, so we keep putting it up as much as we can. I think it's quite cool though, so yeah. So as I was saying, when I first started thinking about, I'm an ecologist, I'm not really a translocation specialist, but we work on threatened species, so we're moving more and more into the translocation world. And I wanted to think about how to address this idea of post-planting ecological monitoring. It's like, what is there that needs to be monitored if you want to measure success or your success criteria or even the trajectories of what you're interested in? And so what do you do? What do you monitor with a translocated population? And after a while I was thinking, you measure the same things as you would for any plant population. It's really the holistic ecology of that species. And obviously there are special things you need to do because you're growing and developing and getting a species ready to put into that system. But once it's there, it's the ecology of that species within its system. That's the important thing. So all those demographic factors are key. Probably, I think one of the most important post-planting things ecologically to do is define the question of what you need to answer. Defining the question allows you to develop sampling protocols that are much more efficient, saves time, saves effort. And a lot of what we do sometimes is limited by funds or time or people. And so having that efficiency in what you monitor is really important. And this isn't necessarily for people in the room. This is more for what I think people who have an outside view of translocation sort of see. They see the main question is, how are the plants that are produced, how are my plants that I go and put out in the field, how are they doing? The question is, what is the fate of those plants? And really what we need to get across, and there's some practitioners still that I've talked to, especially around New South Wales, where that's the key question they're asking, how are my plants doing? But we need to do, what will be the fate of this population? Not just how those plants are, what's the next generation, what are all the trajectories of those other subsequent cohorts that come from the population that you put in there. The things you measure are all the same. They're abundant survival growth of different life history stages. And Leonie mentioned this about tagging. So tagging to know where your plants are and the ones that you've put out there, but tagging cohorts. The number of times I've talked to people in the recent past where they'll say, oh yeah, we've been monitoring and following the fate of our planted population, but whether there's seedlings coming up from the next cohort or the seed bank, it's like, yeah, there's seedlings. It's almost like a binary thing. Yes, there's seedlings, or no, there isn't. Tagging that next cohort is really important. You want to get the trajectories of multiple, at least multiple life stages. That way, with that sort of data, you can start building models that then can help improve projections later on. Fecundity and seed bank, a lot of this has been talked about, the biotic and abiotic interactions that drive ecological processes of the populations, all really important to monitor after planting. We've been talking a little bit about the guidelines. I think they're all really good guidelines. They focus on all aspects going through the process of translocation. Pre-planting requirements are really extensively outlined, and they have to be extensive. They're costly, but they're absolutely necessary. Part of the pre-translocation assessment is obviously ecological understanding. There's the genetics, making sure the found population has that diversity. There's the sites, there's threats and ameliorating those threats, and then there's actually putting the plants in, growing them, putting seeds out, collecting seeds, all that side. Then we have the timeline of translocation down to the translocation, and then there's monitoring. And all of these guidelines and all the practices is kind of based on this timeline. And I've stolen this a little from Joyce's talk at the conference, you probably noticed the other day. But I think this idea that post-planting monitoring is this thing at the end is something we really need to try and communicate. Well, first we need to communicate that it's not this end point. Monitoring is part of the translocation continuum, and I think that we really need to start thinking about this as the beginning of the monitoring phase, of the post-planting monitoring phase, as opposed to an end of line or an end of a result kind of thing. And even if you look at the guidelines, they really state the importance of monitoring, but even at a most simplistic viewpoint, there'll be 7 or 8 chapters in all the guidelines we have, and 6 of them will be dedicated towards the translocating assessment, the planting legislation, everything around it, and there'll be always the last chapter will be 1 chapter on monitoring. And I think we need to sort of show that that's not quite the level of importance necessarily, that really translocation occurs after the pre-translocation assessment bit, and then that's the start of the post-translocation assessment, which also includes ecological understanding, the genetics, the threats. If you get a cohort of seedlings pop up, a success in any measure for translocation, you want to then check the genetics. Are they being all? Are they coming from like only the 1 or 2 individuals of your founding population? You need to think about the post-monitoring assessment just as much as the pre-translocating assessment. It's just as costly, but it's also just as necessary as the pre-planting stuff. I'm just going to talk through a very simplistic example, and we obviously a lot of us work in fire-prone systems in Australia, but also around the world. At the conference the other day, there was a lot of talk about post-2019-2020 bushfires, and I think a lot of us are aware of those. For those from overseas that maybe not, these were fires that burnt at a scale that was unprecedented. That's the term that often came out. In southern Australia, around 7 to 8 million hectares were burnt in that single season. A lot of them are really high severity, so large extents at high severity. And so this is one of those aspects of climate change. Obviously we've got temperatures, we've got we've got distributions that are shifting with climate, but there's these big stochastic events that are increasing in likelihood. Fire, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things under climate change. It's not just here. Records have been broken across California, Europe, Northern America, South America, everywhere, all in the last 10 or 20 years. So if you're thinking about the kinds of questions and the ecological things you need to monitor of a species from a fire-prone system, like any plant, firstly, it has the life cycle. You need to think of all those life cycle stages. So we move through, have mature plants that produce seeds that can get stored in a seed bank, develop seedlings, and the cycle continues. When you have say an obligate seeding species in a fire-prone system, the fire is that ecological driver. So you want to have that as part of your, or that has to be part of your ecological thinking after the translocation's gone in. You have the fire that takes out the mature plants, then the seed bank is activated, whether it's breaking dormancy cues or smoke promoting germination into seedlings. And then you have the cycle, but with fire as a key part of it. There's a whole set of questions then that this comes up, that this brings up. So if you want to understand how to manage this species, or what questions, ecological questions you want to ask, which will lead to the things you monitor, you have to understand the primary juvenile period. How long does it take for a plant to go from being a seedling up to a mature plant and start producing seeds? You also want to be able to measure the seed bank. And this is one thing I haven't seen that much in the translocation literature, is measuring or getting an idea of the abundance of a seed bank is a really key part. It's measurable. Like if you've got a species like this Banksia, you can actually just count the follicles at head height. Obviously, it's a bit trickier if it's a soil seed banking species. You'll have to do some sampling, measuring, either taking it into a greenhouse to germinate or even sifting them if the seeds allow that. Understanding how that part of the process works, how much seed's going into the system, is really important. And then even monitoring long enough or having ecological understanding enough to know the senescence of a species like this. Siggy gave a talk about his grevillea, the grevillea that he's been working on. And that translocated population had all gone out. It's now gone through a couple of decades. All the above ground plants have now senesced. And so it brings into that question, okay, so we've done all the translocating, we've had a success that a whole lot of seeds have been produced. We assume there's a seed bank in there, but we probably should measure it. And now what happens? So as Leonie showed in a couple of her things, you can go in and burn the site if fire is one of those key elements. And this can inform then, okay, if I put a burn in, what happens if there's a failure? All this work that's gone into putting this thing there in the first place. So you have to think, okay, I need multiple populations, or at least burn a part of the population first. All of this, if thinking in this ecological way, I think can help then inform not just the post-planting trajectories of where your species is going, but also informs the ongoing management. And even then, for similarly functional species, you can also inform how you incorporate that sort of information. Another thing that often comes up is how long or when you can stop a monitoring post-planting. And really, I think monitoring you're in it for the long run. It's critical to monitor the trajectory of the population that you planted, but also the subsequent cohorts. And this is something that came up before, tagging is really important. There's been times where that binary response of whether or not there's seedlings is all that there is. Tagging different cohorts of seedlings enables you to actually get those trajectories going, to be able to build those PVAs and build that experimental aspect into the design, and also allow for better projections in the future. Data's costly, but there are ways that we can minimise the collection of data. And so there's a few practical ways we can do that. So defining the questions, as I said at the beginning, is really important. Having a streamlined data collection. So you might want to find out what the cohort of that, what the trajectory of that last cohort is coming through. You don't have to go out necessarily and monitor survival growth every single year. You might be able to spread that out over less frequent but still longer time frame. The thing in working at a university, what universities really want is connection to real world issues, real world problems, and it's been really pushed in the last 10 years or so where I am. And so partnering with universities is a big thing. We have lots of undergrad students coming through. We have lots of programs now where we want to have students collecting data, doing projects and connecting with industry partners. And so I think one of the ways that we can continue and continue to have that university side getting the real world thing, but getting people into the field to collect data for translocation projects, I think is it's something that would actually have a really good outcome and have practical outcomes as well. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.